I don't make response videos often, but when I do, it's because someone says something that's so incredibly revealing and stupid, I can't help but respond. Enter actual fandom. This is a guy who's part of a group who spends their time critiquing entertainment critics. Basically, imagine the Geeks and Gamers or Friday Night Tights crew, but remove any hint of charisma. Now, I don't have a problem with anybody critiquing critics. I think it's fair to call people out if you think they're making bad arguments. However, when you do that, you shouldn't do the thing you accuse others of doing. Kinda makes you look like a hypocrite. And boy, do these guys make themselves look like hypocrites. The premise of their video is that there are people who claim to be fans of various franchises and mediums, but only have negative things to say about the things they claim they love. They call these people anti-fans. Since nobody knows what the hell that word means, they made a video explaining the term. And you know, it'd be real unfortunate and ironic if everything they say, every criticism they make, also applied to them, because that's exactly what happens. It begins with actual fandom.
Wanted to see if you guys would mind, each of us kind of just giving our thoughts on what a fan versus an anti-fan is.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. I mean, it's not helpful to use labels that are nothing more than dog whistles for your in-group. It'd also be a good idea if you didn't use dog whistles in the first place, especially if you're going to turn around and complain about somebody else doing the same thing, like this.
Because it's something I really want to try to do regularly, where like we kind of break down the terms that we use, because it's kind of the opposite of what the right does, right? Like they just throw words around, and they're hiding all these intentions and their dog whistles and stuff like that. And so I think it's important to kind of do the opposite, right?
By doing the exact same thing. Yes, that makes perfect sense. This is the irony of people like this crew. These guys are the type of progressives who just love their special words and labels, many of which have ever-changing definitions, and some of which completely redefine the meaning of words. Let us not forget the whole defund suddenly meaning reform, two words that have never been synonyms. I'm going to take a wild guess that the language he's talking about is the right calling everything woke. Now, I agree they've abused that term so much that woke basically means anything the right doesn't like. However, the right didn't create that word. That word was used by the far lefties who jacked it from the black community. All the right did was take that word and turn it on its head. Both sides do this, and both sides use little in-group catchphrases, so neither side is in any position to bitch about it, but bitch he shall.
There's definitions for fan, right, and fandom, right? And probably how I think of it overlaps with that somewhat, but generally I just consider my fandom, my personal fandom, to be my personal connection to a thing, and like, how it's influenced me, how I've related to it, how it's inspired me or comforted me or give me escape or whatever. And then like fandom, the proper term fandom, which is about a community.
Jesus Christ. It's really simple, dude. Do you like it? A lot? Then you're a fan. There's no personal fandom. We don't need to turn this into some born-again revival. If you like something enough to follow it or engage in it, you're a fan.
And I take that pretty literally, especially now that we have like the Discord that we're trying to build a community there. I think about what would a community be like if I was literally building a community like of homes in IRL, so to speak. And how would we make sure that we protected each other and looked out for each other and stuff like that. So that's how I see a fandom, is and what I hope it could be. Like people have said to me before, oh, actual fandom, you think you're the only way to do fandom? It's like, it's not about me. I'm not describing myself with my channel. I'm describing like a kind of aspiration, an ideal that I'd like to aspire to for like everybody.
Right. That would naturally happen once like-minded people began associating with each other. I'm trying to be nice because later he says he's on the spectrum, and I don't want to seem like I'm picking on him for not getting the obvious, but still, it's not an ideal, dude. It's just what happens when people group together. Humans are tribalistic, and we love forming groups. Give us a topic, and we'll make a group out of it.
Yeah, you go far enough down on the spectrum of that entitlement and stuff like that, and you start introducing your really cringe politics and bigotry and biases and like toxic possessiveness and stuff like that, and that's when you get an anti-fan.
You mean like how some people demand that a given story, film, or game have characters that match their group or focus on their particular pet issues? Or how some people concoct theories about a character's identity status, sex life, race, or religion, and then demand that every other fan agree with their theories, or they'll accuse the naysayers of being bigots. or how some people demand that well-established characters be altered to suit these people's particular political perspectives and lived experiences. Are you talking about that? Because I have a feeling you think all of that's perfectly fine. We just watched this happen with the Spider-Verse film, with these people injecting in their fringe politics, claiming Spider-Gwen is trans because of the colors of her costume, a trans flag on the wall, and one on her father's jacket. And when people refused to go along with it, out came the toxic possessiveness, with these far lefties literally laying claim to the character and just ignoring that Gwen's color scheme is just a pastel version of Spider-Man's blue and red design. Listen to the language these people use when a character gets race swapped. This is my Spider-Man. This is my Starfire. This is my Jimmy Olsen. This is my Ariel. That's exactly the type of behavior you claim you don't like, and yet this is the very argument you and the other three amigos make all the time. In fact, you make it in this video, claiming that these changed and new characters are for a new audience, as if the characters belong to those people, and so any criticism is off limits because the critics aren't the target audience. It doesn't sound like you have a problem with any of this behavior. It just sounds like you don't like it when it's done by someone who doesn't agree with your politics. So then Bob jumps in with this incredibly self-unaware insight.
What I noticed was essentially, I noticed people were essentially calling stuff bad before they've seen it, just because maybe a trailer's come out or there's been some casting calls saying, "Oh, it's bad," and then making litanies of content bashing it before they've even seen it.
That's called marketing, dumbass. The point of trailers and ads and promo interviews is to literally get people to decide to watch the show, read the book, or play the game. If people don't like what they see, are they not allowed to say it looks bad? Are you honestly claiming that you've never watched the trailer, seen a promo, or heard an interview about a film, show, game, or book and thought, wow, that looks like that's gonna suck? It's the strangest argument to complain about people making judgments based on the information given to them by marketing teams to get people to make judgments.
Because that's one of the things that always drove me nuts, because you can't actually judge something really properly until you've seen it. The best you could do is say, hey, this reviewer I know dislikes it and they're reliable. That's about the best you could do unless you've seen it.
Right. So when you saw the trailer for Cats and the CGI effects, you couldn't tell that the VFX looked bad. You couldn't tell that the VFX weren't working. You had to actually sit through the whole film to realize that making the actors look like actual cats was a bad decision. Your argument is completely nonsensical. We judge movies, shows, games, and books before we see them all the time. People can get it wrong, they can misjudge, but it's idiotic to claim that it's wrong for people to judge something based on what the studios provide to us for us to judge that thing.
But, there's also this second angle where even if you've seen it and you've spent all this time bashing on it, you can't turn around on your channel and start saying it's good.
Why not? If I think something will suck and it turns out to be good, why can't I tell people I thought it was good? Why wouldn't I tell them? Wouldn't it make more sense for me to let people know I was wrong if for no other reason than to maintain my credibility?
So like if I look at not a fan, but just, an honest person, it's like whenever you go into a movie, you just give it
A fair shake.
brain farting on the term. Yeah, a fair shake. Yeah. There's a specific term, but go into it with an open mind.
Yeah, no. Sometimes you should have an open mind, and sometimes it's obvious the movie is terrible. Snakes on a Plane, for example. Nobody went to see that expecting that to be a great film. We knew it would be a mess. We went to see it for one reason.
Enough is enough! I have had it with these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking plane!
Everyone knew the movie was going to be bad. We expected it to be fun bad. We enjoyed how bad it was. What people don't like is bad, like The Last Jedi or The Rings of Power, where it's just shit from beginning to end.
Because I've done my time as a proper film critic, and now I'm more of a casual film critic. I see lots of movies every year. Never ever do I want one to be bad.
In the words of Christian Bale,
Oh, good for you!
But if you go into it with the idea of just hating it, just immediately, if you're going into it hating it because you hate a trailer or because you hate some casting choice, that's an anti-fan. I'm sorry. There's no other way to describe it.
I'll keep that in mind the next time Wakandans get pissy that there aren't enough people of color in a film, or that a straight person got cast as a gay character, or some actor in the film is problematic and so the film sucks, because I'm sure you were also talking about all those kinds of things too. Then it moves to Turf, who also doesn't seem to understand what the word fan means, and then tries to explain what he means by anti-fan.
But when I think about the distinction between a fan and an anti-fan, it has more to do with engage with it rather than how you like feel about it, because that's a bit difficult to really like discern from people when we're in the discussion of like a fan and an anti-fan. So it's more for me about the engagement, whether you're engaging with the media that you're a fan of positively or negatively.
What is this argument? First of all, it's easy to figure out what someone feels about something by asking them or actually listening to what they say. If I tell you I don't like something, my feelings aren't a mystery. I just told you how I felt. How is that not clear? Second, your argument about negative engagement is a one-for-one description of far-left fans. Whenever I see progressives talking about some show, film, game, or comic, most of the time it's just them complaining about how everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything's homophobic, and they have to point it all out. The only joy any of you seem to have is when a character is race swapped, sex swapped, or sexuality swapped, or when a fan favorite straight, white, or male character gets killed off.
So it's like positively, and that doesn't mean that you like everything or that you have to say something positive about the things that you like. If you're a Star Wars fan, for example, you don't need to like every piece of Star Wars content, right? You can be critical of parts of it, you can not like some of it, and you're free to talk about that, because I also think, because positive engagement with like something that you're a fan of is not just about dick riding it or just being positive and only saying it's how it's perfect and everything. It's also about why it's not working for you. It's like why is this not something that I particularly enjoy, even despite being a fan of it?
And yet every time anyone criticizes things done with Disney Star Wars, people like you pop up and accuse them of hating women and hating minorities. From the far left's perspective, there are no valid criticisms to be made, certainly not about the overt politicking done by Disney to the detriment of the franchise. There are no fair criticisms of Rey. There are no fair criticisms about Disney's treatment of male characters. There are no fair criticisms about what Riri Johnson did to Luke Skywalker. As one of your collaborators is going to say in a few minutes, anyone making criticisms is just a pathetic man-baby whining because they realize that everything they liked as kids is just baby bantha poodoo. And now they're going poopy because it's being changed for a new generation. And I'm sure you're not about to contradict yourself in the very next statement, because that would be really fucking stupid, and is about to happen right now.
Even when you're critical of something that you're a fan of, it comes from a bit of what Bob says, is like it comes from a place of wanting it to be better, loving this franchise, but then not liking something, but it's like you want it to be good, whereas the kind of negative engagement comes from the people who just, I guess, want it to be bad. Especially the easiest people to call anti-fans are like the grifters, because they they make money off of franchises being bad. The people who talk about wokeness and all this representation and how it's a bad thing, they look for things to get angry about.
So not only did you just contradict yourself, because apparently you actually think being critical of something means you want it to be bad, but you also just described what the far left does all the time. You just described the massive grift known as feminist frequency. That was just some lying con artist posing as a gamer looking for things to be mad about and then bitching about them in videos using other people's gameplay footage. The con artist made a career out of that, and people like you defended her and still defend her. The progressives' entire shtick is to look for something to whine about and promote themselves off that whining, all while labeling their critics bigots for challenging and correcting them. Seems like your issue isn't the grifting or the criticism, it's just who's doing it.
They're looking forward to the next season of Rings of Power because they know that they'll make a lot of money by calling it the worst thing ever, the worst woke garbage, despite never giving it a chance from the beginning.
Amazon did have a chance. They were the ones who sat on the info for the show, trickling out the tiniest bits for a year, most of which focused on the diversity of the cast. That was what Amazon chose to lead with, not honoring the integrity of Tolkien's work, not explaining the premise of the show. No, Amazon's main focus until damn near 9 months before the show came out was checking identity politics boxes. So if Amazon tells me that the point of their show is to deliberately ignore Tolkien's world building because he had too many white characters, and that their goal isn't to tell a good story but to make black fans like me feel seen in the fictional world I've always been a part of since I watched the fucking prologue in Ford City Theater in 2001, you goddamn right I'm gonna judge the show and the bullshit they're showing me. I'm going to judge it based on the design. I'm going to judge it based on the music score. I'm going to judge it based on the casting. I'm going to judge it based on the writing. I'm going to judge it based on the promo pics, interviews, articles, and shitty trailers that they put out to convince my Cinderin-speaking black ass to watch their show. And I judge the quality to be lacking. You don't have to take my word for it. You could take the word of 2/3 of their audience that bounced by episode 4. These motherfuckers got me excited about the prospect of seeing a long-form version of The Lord of the Rings, and they came in with this third-rate, half-assed, half-plagiarized fan fiction. They had their chance, and they blew it. They're lucky I was so restrained.
That's something that I see as being an anti-fan, because they're not contributing towards making the media that they're supposed to be fans of better. They profit off of its downfall. That's what they hope for. And that to me is just not something that a fan would do.
Excuse me, Amazon wasn't listening to anyone like me. Anyone who wanted to see Tolkien's works represented as he wrote them, Amazon had no interest in, including the people they hired. They ignored David Salo. They ignored Tom Shippey. After hiring both of them, they ignored Peter Jackson, and he just wanted to see a script. They wouldn't even send him that. Now, I'm no Tolkien purist, but I don't want his works changed to the point that they're unrecognizable, and that's what Amazon did. They had their own story that they wanted to tell, and they just used his name to get people to view it. I'm a Tolkien fan. Of course I'm going to talk about the show. If I talk about it, it'd make me a hypocrite not to watch it to see if it's as bad as I expect or better than I thought. And yes, I made money off the reviews because my channel is monetized. Why is that a problem? Had I done nothing but positive reviews like Nerd of the Rings and got 500,000 views per review, would that have been fine? You are right about one thing though. I'm not a real fan of the Rings of Power. I am a real J.R.R. Tolkien fan, which is why I didn't like that shitty ass show. Finally, we get to DJ whatever, who decides to ignore any pretense of good faith or steelmanning and go right for the typical "they're baby poo-poo heads" argument.
This is tough pill to swallow time. I think a lot of anti-fans, if you're watching, you're going to clip this, probably going to come after me for this. I'm going to talk about that first, and then I'll get my idea of what a fan is. So anti-fans have what I consider to be internalized shame about loving something that is very juvenile, because they feel like everything needs to be modern and adult and oriented towards their kind of the things that they love, because they have shame about liking something that they perceive being made for kids.
Is that it? Is that the best you could do? You had all the time in the world to come up with some bullshit straw man argument to set ablaze with your lukewarm point, and the best you could come up with is that the fans are ashamed. Seriously? People who proudly proclaim their nerddom and geekdom in the titles of their fucking channels are embarrassed that some shit they watched in the 80s that was obviously made for kids is, shock, gasp, still made for kids. No shit, Sherlock. Next you'll tell me that pro wrestling matches are staged. What 40-year-old wrestling fan could have guessed?
They can't grasp the concept that things that are being made for people that were kids when they loved it. So they try to find reasons behind things that they would not have questioned when they were originally watching these things that they love and they're nostalgic for.
Yeah, that argument makes no fucking sense. No one, not a single living soul, will look at something like the Transformers, the Thundercats, the Ninja Turtles, or the Power Rangers and assume that these shows were made for adults. The level of retardation you'd have to suffer from to begin to believe that will leave you too stupid to even watch the shows. Everyone understands that the shows they watched as kids were written for kids, and as a result, if you watch them as an adult, you might find that your memory of them is much better than what you actually saw. I understand that you may have just come to realize that, but the rest of us have known this since we hit puberty. I was literally having these conversations in high school 25 years ago when Cartoon Network started running 80s cartoons on Toonami. I can't believe that you, a grown man, actually thinks anyone expected obvious kid shows to be the animated version of The Godfather. Do you have an actual argument?
So there's a lot of internalized shame in that. So they hate watch stuff because it's not what they loved when they were kids, but they want it to be. And now all they can do is make fun of it because they think that makes them look more mature.
Stop projecting. If not to stop embarrassing yourself, then because your argument makes no fucking sense. If this were about internalized shame, of which I'm sure you're an expert, wouldn't it make more sense that these people would clown anyone liking the show, whether it's the original or the reboot? But no, your argument is that so-called anti-fans are so embarrassed by the shows they watch as kids that they constantly bring them up in public in nostalgia-laden videos they upload to YouTube for millions to see, all while revealing their faces and legal names, just so that they can shit on a new version of the show for not being as awesome as the original they still like as grown-ass men. This makes sense to you, because it doesn't make sense to me, but then again, I am suffering from a functioning brain. For the second time, do you have an actual argument?
This is why they come after fans like us and other people that love things, because they consider us to be juvenile.
Wrong. You're not fans, and juveniles have way more sense than any of you.
They consider it to be silly and funny to make fun of characters who represent today's youth, because in their eyes, the only youth that matters to them is the one that they saw when they were growing up.
Every generation makes fun of the younger generation, just like every generation makes fun of the older generation. It's what we do, Captain Obvious. Now, please, for the third time, do you have an actual argument?
And I also think that they don't want to like anything at the end of the day. I don't think anything that ever comes out is something they want to like. I even think the stuff that they celebrate, like Super Mario Brothers or Top Gun or whatever it might be, I think in the beginning, their initial reaction to it is, how can I dislike this? That's how I think they look at this media. Because the minute they realize that, oh, people may actually like it, the people that support me, I need to pretend that I like it. I need to pretend that it's something that I care about. Because let's be honest, Super Mario Brothers, it made a lot of money, but it was a family-friendly cartoon.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what it was.
Based on a huge IP. I mean,
exactly. And people knew it was going to make a bunch of money. But using that as like a hammer to nail things into other corporations that are doing the exact same thing tells me that they wanted to hate it originally and they had to come up with a reason why they like it.
Yes, there were people claiming that the Mario film had gone woke. Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers in particular jumped on that real quick, and when the movie came out and did crazy money, oh, that narrative shifted to how the not woke Mario crushed woke Disney. And here's where your straw man argument almost becomes a real argument. There are people who reflexively dislike something before any real info about it comes out, and then make 3 or 4 videos the same day about the same tidbit of non-information just because they're looking for something, anything they can claim is woke. It's also the case that should they be wrong about the wokeness, like with Mario, most of them won't admit it. Some of them are so entrenched in hating things that they literally don't want them to get better. So when something does improve, like the 3rd season of Picard, you get people like Doomcock still trashing it because watching the show empowers the enemy or some other retarded nonsense. There are people who thrive on things not getting better and don't want them to get better. The thing is, everyone knows this, and most of those people aren't very good at hiding it, just like you're not very good at hiding your hypocrisy.
And so they just continue to like this hate cycle. As far as fans go, it's really simple. You love something, you celebrate what you love, you engage with it as a hobby, you love talking about it with your friends, and you're arguing about stuff like who would win a battle, Superman or Captain America, not whether or not one of them is bisexual.
And yet that's literally all you ever hear from so-called fans on the far left like you. You're not interested in characters' powers or battles. All you care about are identities. Who's black, who's female, who's gay, who's trans. That's it. Does it matter to you that Miles Morales has been around for a decade, and yet his only defining trait is still his race? It's not his character. It's not his story. It's not his trials or battles or defining moments. It's the fictional amount of melanin in his skin and how black folks like me are supposed to see ourselves in him because we can't see ourselves in Spider-Man because he's white. This is the far left shtick. Don't try to put that on anyone else. This is all you. Then actual fandom jumps back in to claim he's never seen any progressive agenda in comics, and then immediately talks about how he loved the progressive agenda in modern comics.
But like still, we would have arguments about who could win, but it was always like based on the characters and based on what's right there on the page, and not like some idea of some fucking force of agenda being put into it and representing something that isn't there on the page. And I don't know, man, it's really weird. It's like when I started seeing that stuff popping up in fandom, it was really bizarre to me, and that's kind of what led me down this path of like wanting to understand it at first, and like wanting to, originally I was like, when I started seeing stuff, claims by like Comicsgate and whatnot, I'm like, I was not reading comics at the time, so I was like, whoa, are they really doing this, like making comics bad because they're blah blah blah? And I'm start reading comics again. So like, really, thank you, Comicsgate, for one thing. Because I look into it, I'm like, wait a second. No, some of these comics are bad or not for me. Some of them aren't very good. Some of them are great. And I'm not seeing anything that's representative of what they're saying that's anything out of the ordinary. Like, yes, there was a push for, in Marvel in particular, they, introduced a lot of people of color and female characters, versions, legacy characters and stuff. And that to me was just like, oh, cool. So they're actually doing something they should have been doing a long time ago.
That you're not bothered by the agenda doesn't mean it wasn't there. The issue isn't the existence of so-called marginalized characters. The issue is how and why they're introduced. At the height of the popularity of the MCU films, Marvel Comics race and sex swapped the entire cast of the Avengers in the comic books. This had nothing to do with sales numbers and everything to do with Axel Alonso and Sana Amanat playing politics. Now, it backfired because it turns out that removing the characters people like and replacing them with dollar store tokens whose sole claim to fame is what identity box they check isn't going to make comic book readers buy comics. It was made worse by both the art and the writing for the comics being a mediocre mess. Marvel didn't want to pay top talent, so they got the cheapest people they could, most of whom aligned with progressive political views, many of whom had never written or drawn comics before, plenty of whom used comics to air their political hot takes and turn existing characters into self-inserts, and damn near all of whom viewed comics as a stepping stone to get into Hollywood. The combination of identity politics, shitty storytelling, and disinterested creatives made for terrible comics that barely sold. It's fine if you like that hot garbage, but that doesn't mean it wasn't garbage. It doesn't mean it wasn't ridiculous to turn Iceman into a kitschy 90s gay dude, or have America Chavez say things like holy menstruation, or let Nick Spencer vent his political outrage by turning Captain America into a fucking Nazi. All of that was agenda driven and killed Marvel sales numbers. The only reason they made more money was because they kept upping the cover prices. Now you've got the same people who did this whining on social media about how comic books broke them. No, comics didn't break them. They broke comics, and now they're getting trashed by manga with minimal effort.
I think all of this anti-fandom rhetoric we see is a cope. I think it's like this weird cope where it's like, you're not making stuff for me anymore. You're making it for a younger generation, and now I'm going to be mad at it.
That's a nice theory, but I have a question. Since most people who buy comics are 30 years old and up, does it make sense for the comic book industry to stop making books for the people who financially support the industry? How does that make any business sense? Most young people don't read comics. Of those who do, most of them don't buy them. Of those who will buy them, they mostly buy manga. The American comic book industry survives due to middle-aged men buying their books. Why spite them when you could just as easily create separate titles to appeal to a younger audience? Boomers and Gen Xers invested their money and time into the industry, and that industry just decided they no longer wanted or needed the only people buying their books. It's not surprising those people would be pissed about that. It'd be more surprising if they weren't.
I think that as fans also, you don't advocate for something to not exist. I mean, I think that's completely unethical as a fan. Like to go, hey, the stuff that I love isn't happening anymore, so you can't have the thing that you love. Like, that's just a weird way to look at something.
Again, with the straw man arguments, who's claiming that if they can't have what they want, nobody can have anything? Who's saying this? No one. No one is saying this. They are saying that nobody actually wants this stuff because the majority of the books, games, and films fail. For every Spider-Verse, there's a Birds of Prey or a Charlie's Angels. Then you have billion-dollar films like Captain Marvel and Disney's Star Wars that most people don't like. Then there are people like you, who complain about anyone wanting more stories like the ones that made them love the franchises. How dare anybody want something in the vein of Indiana Jones or the original Star Wars or Batman the Animated Series? You spend all your time shitting on the things you claim you love, and then you turn around and make a 20-minute video bitching about other people doing your shtick.
A fan is someone who engages with the thing, not always positively, but like they'll critically engage with it in a reasonable way, a fair way. And then a non-fan is just somebody that doesn't fucking pay attention to the thing, right? So there's got to be a third thing, which is an anti-fan. They're paying attention to it, but just all they're doing is shitting on it and in some cases lying about it and advocating like for it to fail and stuff like that.
Which is exactly what the far left does. They have nothing positive to say unless it's aligned with their politics, and even then they still trash the thing they claim they love because it's inherently problematic. It took you guys 20 minutes to basically admit that you're all a bunch of anti-fans, and the lamest possible version of that, because your entire shtick is being pissy that other people are pissy about something none of you actually like. But I think I have a better definition of anti-fan. It's someone whose sole purpose is to destroy what other people love. It's someone who goes into a community not with any intention of enjoying the company of like-minded people, but just to disrupt and overthrow and twist everything to fit their political point of view. It's someone who spends more time shaming people for liking some silly kids show, or some goofy comic, or some dopey video game, than encouraging other people to watch those shows, read those comics, and play those games. It's someone who gets ass mad whenever anyone doesn't like the progressive approved character. It's someone who thinks a character's race, sex, and sexuality make them unrelatable if they're white, straight, or male. It's someone who spends more time complaining about women's costumes than talking about any character's story arcs. In short, an anti-fan is a fake fan, nothing but a poser, and you can always tell who they are because they're the first to claim they're the actual fandom. Well, do you know what this fan says to that? Erin Karakpard Finn, and Sirius Sawan. And if you were an actual fan, you'd recognize Neo Sindarin. But what do I know? Im Al Fin, Navair.